Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. If there's one thing that could make a quiet English village more exciting than a garden fete, it's gossip served with sponge cake, and Mrs. Pym had both in generous supply. Her parlour at Sutton Mead was the sort of place where the clock ticked loudly only because everyone else was listening. The air smelled of lavender polish and lemon biscuits, and the only thing brighter than the china on her tea table was her appetite for news. Tuppence Beresford sat forward in her chair, chin on her gloved hand, pretending to be merely polite. Tommy, sprawled comfortably on the sofa, had long abandoned the fight against Mrs. Pym's enthusiasm and surrendered to the current of conversation. "I tell you," Mrs. Pym said, leaning close as though the aspidistra might report her, "Colonel Arbuthnot has simply vanished. Not a word, not a note. Vanished." Tuppence blinked. Vanished? As in disappeared? As in puff, gone? Mrs. Pym's teacup rattled faintly on its saucer. "He's been renting that little cottage near the common these 6 months. Paid regular as a metronome, polite as you please." Then, 2 nights ago, the milkman finds the door ajar, supper untouched, and the Colonel's pipe left on the mantelpiece. The dog locked in, howling like a banshee. The constable says it's just a walk that went too long, but I don't believe it for a tick. Tommy gave a low whistle. "Sounds like a vanishing act worthy of Houdini. Any reason for him to scarper?" "None," Mrs. Pym said, triumphant, "unless you count that woman in grey." Now Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "Woman in grey?" Mrs. Pym nodded solemnly, delighted to have an audience. "Saw her myself. Came by the afternoon before he disappeared. Refused tea, mind you. Said she was expected elsewhere. Youngish, quiet sort. Gloves, veil, and a London accent if ever I heard one." Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. He smiled faintly, the way a man does when he senses trouble that isn't his, yet. "And what does the good constable make of it all?" "Nothing, naturally," Mrs. Pym sniffed. "Said the Colonel's niece is arranging things, but I've never seen this niece, have you?" Tuppence shook her head. "No, but I think we might." Tommy groaned. "Oh, here we go. Every time a cat sneezes in this county, you start an investigation." "It's called curiosity, dear heart," Tuppence said, "and it's very nearly patriotic." He smiled at that, reaching for another biscuit. "So what do you propose? We barge in and demand to know what became of the Colonel?" Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "Nothing so uncivilized. We'll just happen to take a stroll past his cottage. It's such a lovely day, and I've always wanted to see what roses grow on military soil." Mrs. Pym clucked approvingly. "You do that, my dear, and if you see anything out of place, do let me know. Not that I gossip, of course." An hour later, the Beresfords were walking along the narrow lane toward the edge of the common. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and chimney soot. The Colonel's cottage appeared ahead, prim, whitewashed and unnervingly tidy, as though expecting visitors it didn't wish to see. Tommy leaned on the gate. "Picturesque enough, though I don't see any rose bushes worth dying for." Tuppence frowned at the front door. Too quiet, even for the countryside. They stepped inside the gate. The grass was cropped evenly, the path swept clean, but when Tuppence pushed the door, it creaked open at once, unlocked. The interior smelled faintly of tobacco and something metallic like old coins. "Careful," Tommy murmured. Tuppence moved through the little parlour, eyes darting. A teapot rested on the tray, cold. Books on military campaigns lined the shelf, arranged with almost obsessive order. And on the mantel, just as Mrs. Pym had said, lay the Colonel's pipe, half full of tobacco, its ash spilled like a frozen gesture. "He didn't plan to be gone long," she murmured. "No man leaves his pipe mid-puff." "Maybe he just went out for a walk," Tommy suggested, though without conviction. "The supper, though, that's odd." "And this," said Tuppence, kneeling by the hearth. She held up a fragment of burnt paper. The edges were blackened, but a scrap of ink remained, a crest faintly military. A single word survived beneath it. Operation. The rest had crumbled into ash. Tommy took it, squinting. Operation what? Sounds like something from the old days. Or something he wasn't supposed to have kept, Tuppence said softly. The window by the writing desk caught her eye. Its latch bore a dark smear, grease or oil, the sort used on metal hinges or gun parts, and faintly, Under the scent of dust, she could still smell smoke, not from the hearth but from a cigar, fresh, foreign, and out of place. She turned. He had a visitor, not a lady with lavender perfume either. Before Tommy could answer, a voice barked from the doorway. "Oi, what do you think you're doing?" The village constable filled the frame, red-faced and flustered. "Trespassing, that's what it is." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Not trespassing, officer, merely concerned. We were friends of the Colonel's. Mrs. Pym mentioned his disappearance." The constable puffed out his chest. "Nothing to concern yourselves with. His niece is handling things." Tommy raised a brow. "Indeed? And where might the lady be found?" "That's private business," the constable snapped. "Now, if you'd kindly step outside." "Of course," Tuppence said, gliding past him. "But I do hope she's comfortable in such a tragic time. You know how nerves can be." Outside, Tommy muttered, "You're playing a dangerous hand." She linked her arm through his. "Darling, I was born with a full deck." That evening, back at the inn, the Beresfords took a quiet table near the window. The innkeeper was a small man with a large moustache and the discretion of a parish priest. He was polishing glasses when the door opened and a new guest stepped in. The woman wore grey, tailored coat, matching hat, and gloves that fit too precisely. Her veil was down, and she kept her face angled from the light as she signed the guest register. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and deliberate. "Miss Spencer." Tommy nudged Tuppence under the table. "Grey gloves and London accent?" Tuppence's eyes never left the woman. "Right on cue." Miss Spencer accepted her key and went upstairs without glancing back. But Tuppence noticed something peculiar, the tremor in her hand as she passed the pen, and the faint imprint of letters pressed through the paper below her name. When she and Tommy rose to leave, Tuppence casually lifted the next blank line of the register, tilting it to the lamplight. The indentation was clear enough. G. Arbuthnot. Tommy whistled softly. "Writing practice?" "Or unfinished correspondence," Tuppence murmured. "Either way, our grey lady has something to hide." He grinned. "So what now? Stake out? Interrogation over breakfast?" Tuppence's smile was quick and bright. "Neither. We'll invite her to tea." Tommy groaned. "Ah, yes, your most dangerous weapon." She stood, straightening her gloves. "Tommy, my dear, never underestimate the power of a teapot." They stepped into the corridor, the sound of a clock striking 7 echoing down the hall. Somewhere upstairs a door closed, quiet, precise, deliberate. Tuppence looked up, thoughtful. "There's something more to that cottage than teacups and toadstools," she said softly, "and I intend to find out what." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains as they took their seats by the window. Miss Spencer descended at precisely 9 o'clock, dressed impeccably once more, the same grey ensemble, the same gloves. She nodded to the innkeeper, ordered coffee and toast, then settled at a corner table with a small valise by her chair. Tommy unfolded his paper, pretending indifference. Tuppence, behind her teacup, watched like a cat before a pounce. The woman read a letter, brief, single page, then tore it neatly into strips and tucked the fragments into her handbag. Tommy muttered, "Subtle." "She's either being followed," said Tuppence, "or following someone." As if on cue, the inn door opened again. A postman entered with a single envelope asking for Miss Spencer. She accepted it without expression, but her knuckles whitened as she broke the seal. For a heartbeat, fear flickered across her face. Then she rose, murmured thanks, and left at once. The Beresfords exchanged a glance. "Do we give her a head start?" Tommy asked. Tuppence smiled faintly. 10 minutes, enough to convince her she's alone. They followed her out of the village, keeping a discreet distance. Miss Spencer's figure moved briskly along the lane toward the common, the same direction as the Colonel's cottage. When she paused near a hedgerow, glancing back, the Beresfords ducked behind a milk cart. After a tense moment, she walked on, straight toward the gate of the cottage, where the constable now stood speaking to a man in civilian clothes. The man turned briefly, revealing a limp and a sharp profile. Tuppence caught Tommy's arm. "There. Did you see him?" "Tall, angular, with a limp. He doesn't look like a niece either." The constable handed the man a paper, then stepped aside. Miss Spencer hesitated, then followed him inside. Tommy exhaled. "And there goes our mystery woman, right into the lion's den." "Or the Colonel's secrets," said Tuppence softly. They stood watching as the cottage door closed behind her, the latch clicking with a sound that seemed to end the morning's peace. Tuppence slipped her arm through Tommy's. "I think, my dear, that our walk has just turned into a case." He sighed, half amused, half resigned. "Then I suppose there's no stopping you." "None at all," she said. "After all, what's life without a little deceit? And a good cup of tea afterwards?" The knock on Miss Spencer's door came precisely at 4:30, not a minute earlier, not a second later. Tuppence had an instinct for timing. She believed a mystery unravelled best when the kettle had just begun to sing. "Come in," said a voice from within, composed, faintly wary. Tuppence entered with a tray of tea and an air of innocence that could have fooled an archbishop. "I thought," she said cheerfully, "you might enjoy some company. Tea's rather lonely for one, isn't it?" Miss Spencer stood by the window, framed in pale light. The room smelled faintly of starch and violet water. Her suitcase was neatly closed, her gloves resting atop it like two small sentinels. "How very kind," she said, in that clipped tone that sounded carefully rehearsed. "I'm afraid I'm a poor conversationalist. Travel tires me." "Oh, nonsense," Tuppence replied, setting down the tray. "Conversation is a tonic, almost as restorative as jam sponge. Sit down, do." Reluctantly, Miss Spencer obeyed. Her movements were precise but tense, as if each gesture had been checked twice before delivery. Tuppence poured tea, watching the steam rise between them like a veil. "Such a quiet little village," she began. "You must find it dull after London." "I rather like quiet," said Miss Spencer. "Noise unsettles me." Tuppence smiled. "And yet you knew Colonel Arbuthnot. He wasn't exactly the quiet type, was he?" The other woman's spoon clinked faintly against the cup. "The Colonel, I knew him through family circles, a distant connection." "Oh? Family?" Tuppence's tone was artfully mild. "Then you must know whether he ever served in Africa. Mrs. Pym swore he was full of stories about the veldt." Miss Spencer hesitated. Yes, the Northwest Frontier, wasn't it?" Tuppence's eyes brightened. "Northwest Frontier, was it? Oh dear, my memory must be slipping. I thought it was Africa." Miss Spencer's colour changed slightly. "Yes, of course. Africa. My mistake. So many postings, one loses track." "Indeed," said Tuppence lightly, "especially when they're not one's own." Miss Spencer smiled thinly. "You have quite a turn of phrase, Mrs. Beresford." "Oh, everyone says so," Tuppence returned sweetly. "It's my only dangerous trait." There was a pause, not long, but long enough for the air to grow taut. Somewhere outside, a cart rattled past, its wheels striking the cobbles like a metronome. Miss Spencer rose abruptly. "Forgive me, I must write a letter before the post goes. Thank you for the tea." "Of course," said Tuppence, collecting the cups. "But do remember to rest. Travel and secrets both can exhaust one dreadfully." Miss Spencer froze for the briefest instant, then smiled again, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Beresford." Downstairs, Tommy was enjoying an entirely different sort of conversation, one lubricated by tobacco and the cheerful gossip of the village postmaster. The man's spectacles glinted like twin magnifying glasses as he leaned across the counter. "Oh yes," he said, lowering his voice. "Colonel Arbuthnot received foreign post regular as clockwork. Odd that. Looked official. Blue envelopes with military franking. Some from Cairo, one from Gibraltar." "Friends from the old regiment, perhaps?" Tommy suggested casually. The postmaster pursed his lips. "Perhaps, but I've been in this business 30 years, and I know when mail's official and when it's not. These were the sort that make you sign receipts, and he never did, not once. Always said the sender knew better than to wait for a reply." Tommy's brow furrowed. "And the last one came when?" 3 weeks ago," the man said promptly. Then nothing. Vanished as sudden as he did. Tommy thanked him, slipped a coin into the charity box and left. The breeze outside smelled faintly of damp earth and tobacco. He walked back to the inn with that peculiar sense of foreboding that came when a simple mystery began to sprawl wider than expected. When he entered the common room, Tuppence was waiting at their usual table, stirring her tea as though divining secrets from the ripples. "Well," she said. He dropped into the chair opposite. "Foreign letters. Cairo, Gibraltar, all marked military. The colonel wasn't just retired, he was still in some sort of correspondence with someone who preferred discretion." Her eyes lit. That fits. Miss Spencer knew him, or knew of him, but her story leaks like a sieve. She mentioned the northwest frontier before correcting herself to Africa. Tommy frowned, which means she either lied about knowing him or lied about where he served. Exactly. And either way, she's hiding something. The question is, what? They sat in silence for a moment. From the bar came the murmur of two locals discussing sheep auctions with the gravity of statesmen. The fire crackled softly, casting their reflections in flickers. Tuppence leaned in. We'll have to search her room. Tommy looked scandalized. Good Lord, Tuppence, we can't just go rifling through the lady's belongings. We can, if she's not there. And what makes you think she won't be? Her smile was sharp as a pin. Because she's just gone out the back door. Tommy twisted in his chair. Sure enough, through the half-open kitchen door, they saw Miss Spencer's grey silhouette moving briskly down the garden path toward the lane. Right, he said, rising. You distract the innkeeper. Done, she said, already turning on her brightest smile. 5 minutes. Tuppence occupied Mr. Davies with a long and detailed discussion of jam. It was a topic she could expound upon indefinitely, especially when national pride was involved. Of course, she declared, the French do it all wrong. Too much sugar, not enough soul. By the time Mr. Davies was proudly describing his grandmother's damson preserve, Tommy had slipped upstairs. Miss Spencer's room was in perfect order, almost too perfect. The bed was made, the trunk closed, the washstand immaculate. Yet on the table by the window a folded newspaper caught his eye. It was open to a small cutting. Missing officer believed alive. New clues in Ironbridge mystery. Ironbridge. The word struck him like a bell. He'd heard it before, in Cairo perhaps, during one of his old intelligence briefings. Something classified. He looked closer. Beneath the newspaper lay a slip of paper, a receipt, yellowed at the edges. It read, London Storage and Safe Deposit Company Bill Locker 14B, G. Arbuthnot. Tommy pocketed it and left everything else untouched. Downstairs, Tuppence was just concluding an impassioned speech about the moral decline of modern marmalade. And another thing, she said loudly, the peel should be visible. It's a question of integrity. Tommy caught her eye and nodded toward the stairs. She made a graceful exit, declaring that she must replenish her patience with tea. In their room, she shut the door sharply. Well? He handed her the receipt. Locker 14B, London, and this. He laid the newspaper clipping on the table. Tuppence read it aloud, lips moving as she pieced the lines together. Missing officer believed alive. Tommy, this can't be coincidence. No, he said. And Miss Spencer's not who she claims to be. She's connected to this Ironbridge affair, whatever it is. Perhaps the colonel wasn't the one who vanished, Tuppence murmured. Perhaps he disappeared himself. Tommy nodded slowly. And if that's true, someone's looking for him, maybe to keep him quiet. The floorboard creaked overhead. They froze. A moment later, the innkeeper's voice called faintly from below. Mrs. Beresford, are you all right up there? Perfectly, thank you, Tuppence answered brightly, though her eyes were dark with thought. When his footsteps faded, Tommy exhaled. We can't stay here long. No, she agreed. Tomorrow we go to London. We'll see what secrets the colonel locked away before someone else does. She folded the clipping carefully, tucking it into her handbag. Miss Spencer's game is dangerous, and she's one move ahead, but the board's ours now. Tommy smiled faintly. And what will you do if she returns? Oh, I shall invite her for tea again, said Tuppence, this time with fewer scones and more questions. That evening, the inn settled into its usual hush. A cat prowled the windowsill. The fire burned low. Tuppence and Tommy sat by the hearth, each pretending to read but listening for every creak of the staircase. At 10:30, Tommy went to check. Miss Spencer's room was empty, the trunk gone, the wardrobe bare. The only trace of her presence was the faint scent of violets and the indentation of a head on the pillow. He returned quietly. Gone, he said. Tuppence looked up from her book, eyes bright with something halfway between triumph and dread. Then she knows we're close. She rose, took her coat, and looked out the window. The lane beyond was silvered in moonlight, silent except for the distant hoot of an owl. Tommy, she said softly, I think our vanished colonel isn't the only one being hunted. The sound of the train wheels had the rhythm of thought, steady, relentless, full of half-formed possibilities. Tuppence watched the countryside slide past the window in a blur of green and smoke, the folded receipt from the London Storage and Safe Deposit Company balanced on her knee like an accusation. Tommy sat opposite, reading a paper he hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. "You realise," he said finally, "that this could be nothing more than an old trunk of moth-eaten uniforms." "Or it could be the key to why a respectable colonel vanished into thin air," Tuppence replied. "You have no romance in your soul." "I married you," he said. "That's enough adventure for any man." The train slowed as it neared Paddington. London spread before them, restless, layered, full of secrets pretending to be noise. The moment their feet hit the platform, Tuppence's pace quickened. She loved the city's hum, even when it promised trouble. The London Storage and Safe Deposit Company stood off a narrow street in Bloomsbury, its brick facade prim, respectable, and faintly suspicious in its tidiness. The brass plaque gleamed like a conscience that had been recently polished. Inside, the air smelled of oil and paper, the scent of things locked away too long. A clerk emerged from behind a wire-screen desk. Thin, efficient, and powdered with dust, he bowed slightly. "Good afternoon. May I assist you?" Tommy produced the receipt. "We're acting on behalf of Colonel Gerald Arbuthnot, Locker 14B. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Ah, yes, the Colonel. He, or rather, his representative, collected a parcel recently." Tuppence's eyebrows lifted. "His representative?" "Yes, ma'am. A gentleman, tall, slight limp, perhaps in his 50s, carried himself like a soldier, produced impeccable identification papers and a letter of authority, quite in order." "When was this?" Tommy asked. 2 days before the colonel was reported missing." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "And the identification, was it retained?" The clerk shook his head regretfully. "Standard procedure allows only visual verification. I did, however, make note of the insignia on his document, crossed swords within a laurel. I took it for an army crest." Tuppence murmured, "Crossed swords and laurels. That's not a regimental badge, I know." The clerk blinked. "If I may say so, madam, the entire affair seemed delicate. The gentleman spoke little, but he handled the key as though it were dynamite." They followed the clerk down a corridor lined with numbered steel doors. Their footsteps echoed softly. Dust motes floated in the yellow light. "Locker 14B," said the clerk, unlocking the door. "As you see, quite empty now. Only the colonel's ledger and a few personal effects remain. You are welcome to inspect them, with permission noted here." He tapped the register politely and withdrew. Tuppence crouched by the narrow space. A wooden crate sat against the wall, its lid half open. Inside were odds and ends, an old military cap, a silver cigarette case, a bundle of papers tied with string. Beneath them, the wooden floor looked faintly disturbed, one plank cleaner than its neighbours. Tommy noticed it too. "Well now," he murmured, "this looks promisingly irregular." Tuppence fetched a small penknife from her handbag. She never travelled without one. With careful pressure, they levered the plank free. Beneath it lay a thin envelope sealed with wax, the imprint faint but legible. "Operation Ironbridge. Confidential." Tommy whistled. "There's our colonel." Tuppence unfolded the paper inside. It was a fragment of a larger map. Rivers, railway lines, coded markings. Across the corner ran a single annotation in firm handwriting. "Hold bridge at all cost. Primary infiltration point." Her voice dropped. Ironbridge wasn't a location. It was a code name. Something from the war. "Or something that never ended," Tommy said grimly. She folded the fragment and slipped it into her handbag. "Whatever this is, people are willing to kill or vanish for it." Before he could reply, the lights flickered, once, twice, then died, plunging the corridor into darkness. Tuppence froze. "Tommy?" "I'm here," he said, voice taut. "Don't move." A soft scrape sounded at the far end, leather against concrete, then a rush of air, the faint thud of a door closing. Tommy lunged forward, flashlight snapping on. Its narrow beam cut through the gloom, glancing off metal and shadow. There! Someone just passed the gate! They ran, footsteps drumming through the echoing hall. A silhouette darted ahead, tall, angular, the limp unmistakable. He turned down another corridor. The beam caught the edge of a grey overcoat before it vanished around the corner. "Stop!" Tommy shouted, absurdly optimistic. The chase wound through rows of lockers, through the cold air heavy with dust and oil. Tuppence's heart hammered, the echo of their pursuit sounding like the roll of distant drums. The figure reached the outer door, wrenched it open, and was gone. When they burst out into the courtyard, there was nothing but the clatter of a retreating motorbike disappearing into traffic. Tommy lowered the torch. Well, that was moderately unsporting. Tuppence leaned against the wall, catching her breath. He had the advantage: darkness, familiarity, and a limp that might be less real than convenient. Tommy looked around. "We'll have to report this." "To whom?" "The police will ask what we were doing prying up floorboards." "No, we keep this between us until we understand it." She nodded, straightening her hat. "Agreed, but someone knew we'd come here. Either Miss Spencer tipped them off or we've acquired a shadow of our own." They stopped for coffee at a small cafe off Holborn. The clatter of cups and hiss of the percolator felt almost absurd after the silence of the storage depot. Tommy stirred sugar into his cup absently. "Let's think it through. The Colonel hides something called Ironbridge in a storage locker. A man with a limp and perfect papers retrieves it just before the Colonel disappears. We find what he missed, a single map fragment. And then someone tries to stop us finding even that," said Tuppence, "which means we're closer than they'd like." She pulled the folded fragment from her handbag and spread it discreetly between them. "Look, the markings. River, rail lines, and these initials, GH, could be General Headquarters." Tommy studied it. "Or George Hargreaves. Didn't Mrs. Pym mention that name once, the general the Colonel served under?" "She did," Tuppence said, "and if Ironbridge was military, he'd know." Tommy drained his cup. "Then our next visit is to the War Office, or wherever retired generals go to polish their medals." "Let's start with his club," said Tuppence. "Men like Hargreaves always have one, preferably one with leather chairs and an abundance of brandy." Tommy grinned. "You have an unerring instinct for places that serve drinks." "Experience," she replied. "And curiosity, the twin engines of civilization." By late afternoon, London had drawn its evening veil. They walked along the embankment, the Thames murmuring below like an old conspirator. Traffic hummed, lights glowed, and somewhere behind them footsteps seemed to echo one beat too late. Tuppence turned sharply. The pavement was empty. Only a man selling newspapers lingered under a street lamp, calling headlines to nobody in particular. Tommy touched her elbow. "Nerves." "Instinct," she said. "We're being followed." "Let him. If he wants to trail us, he'll learn what bad company we keep." They reached their hotel near Russell Square just before dusk. As Tommy turned the key in the door, a faint rustle made them both pause. The lamp by the bed was on, and someone had been inside. A cigarette still smouldered in the ashtray, its end crushed but warm. Tuppence crossed to the table. The drawer where she had hidden her handbag was slightly open, but the map fragment lay untouched inside. Tommy exhaled. Either they didn't find it, or they're waiting to see what we do next. Tuppence closed the drawer with a click. "Then we'll give them a performance." They dined quietly in the hotel restaurant, speaking little. Outside, London moved on, trams clanging, laughter rising from the pavements, life indifferent to secrets. Yet beneath the surface, the city felt charged, as though some buried current hummed through its veins. Tommy watched her over his glass. "You know what this means, don't you?" "That our missing colonel wasn't merely absent," said Tuppence softly. "He was silenced, and whatever Ironbridge was, it's still alive." He nodded. "And we've just stepped into its shadow." Later, as they prepared for bed, Tuppence glanced out the window. Across the street, beneath a lamppost, a man stood motionless, hat low, collar high. Even through the glass she could see the faint unevenness of his stance, the limp. She drew the curtain quickly and turned back to Tommy. "He's there." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have to make him come to us." "How?" He smiled faintly. "By doing exactly what he expects, and a little bit he doesn't." Tuppence met his gaze, eyes bright with determination. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The night held its breath outside, and somewhere in the darkness, their unseen pursuer shifted, the patient shadow of a game that had only just begun. The telegram arrived just after breakfast, slipped under the hotel room door, anonymous but unmistakably urgent. The thin yellow paper carried no address, no sender's name, only 5 words, printed in block capitals. Meet me, Paddington, 2 o'clock. A friend. Tommy looked up from his coffee. Well, he said, that's either a lead or a trap. Tuppence reached for the telegram and read it twice. Both, probably. The two aren't mutually exclusive. She laid it flat on the table, smoothing the creases as though to coax secrets from the ink. Paddington Station, she murmured. Crowds, noise, easy exits. Ideal for anyone wanting to disappear or reappear. Tommy folded the paper neatly. And the signature? A friend, said Tuppence, the oldest lie in the book. By 1:30, the Beresfords were walking through Paddington's great arched concourse, a cathedral of steam and echoes. Trains groaned on the platforms like restless beasts. The smell of coal and damp wool hung thick in the air. Porters shouted, children cried, and the great clock under the roof ticked toward 2. Tuppence scanned the crowd. We're to find a friend in a sea of strangers. Tommy adjusted his hat. She'll find us. These people always do. They moved slowly along the platform, past soldiers in khaki and women clutching paper-wrapped parcels. Then Tuppence stopped suddenly. A woman in dark blue stood near the tea stall, veiled, gloved, and very still amid the restless motion of the station. When she saw Tuppence looking, she raised her hand, a small, deliberate gesture. That's her, said Tuppence quietly. They approached. The woman's veil obscured most of her face, but her voice, when she spoke, carried an unmistakable tremor. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford? Tuppence nodded. Yes. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd believe the message. We make a habit of believing peculiar messages, Tommy said lightly. You are? Mrs. Darcy, she said. I nursed Colonel Arbuthnot in Cairo during the war. He trusted me, perhaps too much. Her gloved hands fidgeted with the handle of her handbag. He was in great distress when we last met. He'd discovered a list, names of traitors, men who sold information to the enemy. He meant to expose them. That's why he vanished. Tuppence leaned forward slightly. A list? Of living men? Mrs. Darcy hesitated. Some are dead, but not all, and some are powerful still. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Tommy lowered his voice. Why come to us? Because I am being followed. Her eyes flicked toward the far end of the platform. He's here now. Tuppence glanced quickly but saw only the shifting blur of passengers. Who? A man with a limp, Mrs. Darcy whispered. He was the Colonel's assistant once. Now he works for someone else. When he discovered the Colonel was alive, he... She broke off abruptly as a man brushed past, jostling her shoulder. Her handbag slipped from her grasp and fell to the ground, scattering its contents. Gloves, a mirror, a small folded photograph. Tommy bent to retrieve them. Here, let me... But when he looked up, Mrs. Darcy was gone. The veil, the blue coat, the faint scent of perfume, all vanished into the swirl of travellers. Tuppence knelt beside him. Tommy, the photograph. He turned it over. It was a faded snapshot of Colonel Arbuthnot, smiling stiffly in uniform. Across his face, in thick red ink, someone had drawn a cross, precise, deliberate, final. Tuppence's voice dropped to a whisper. That's not a warning, it's a death mark. They searched the station for nearly 20 minutes, combing through crowds and corridors. But Mrs. Darcy had melted into the noise and motion of London life. Only the photograph remained, mute and accusatory. Tommy led Tuppence to the platform cafe. The place smelled of overboiled tea and impatience. He spread the photograph and the telegram on the table between them. She wanted to tell us about that list, he said, but someone stopped her before she could. Tuppence stirred her tea absently, or frightened her into silence. She might have run when she saw him. Then who dropped the handbag? Tommy countered. That wasn't panic, that was interruption. Someone brushed her on purpose. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. A man with a limp, the same one from the storage depot. Tuppence nodded slowly. He's everywhere, isn't he? Always just behind the scene, never far enough to catch. They fell silent for a moment, listening to the clatter of crockery and the whistle of departing trains. The noise seemed to underline their helplessness. "Tommy," Tuppence said softly, "if she's right, if there really is a list, then the Colonel didn't disappear. He was made to. And now the same people are after her." Tuppence looked around the cafe, her gaze sharp. "And possibly after us." Tommy smiled thinly. "We must be getting close then." They left the station an hour later, the winter afternoon fading into grey. Outside, taxis jostled for space and the smell of petrol mingled with cold air. Tuppence wrapped her scarf tighter. "Do you think she'll contact us again?" she asked. "She might not get the chance," Tommy said grimly. They started toward the main road. Behind them, footsteps echoed, a steady rhythm, uneven but deliberate. Tuppence caught the sound first and turned. Half a street behind, a man walked with a slight limp. His overcoat collar was turned up, and his hat brim shaded his face. He moved without haste but never lost distance. Tommy's voice was calm. "Don't look again. Let's take the next corner." They turned into a narrower street lined with shuttered shops. The footsteps followed, steady, patient. Tuppence glanced at the reflection in a window, the man's shape, blurred but distinct, closing in. "Keep walking," Tommy murmured. "We'll double back at the next crossing." But as they reached the junction, a delivery cart rumbled between them and their pursuer. When it passed, the man was gone. Tommy exhaled sharply. "He's good." Tuppence's expression hardened. "So are we." They reached their hotel without further incident, though both felt the invisible eyes of London upon them. In their room, Tuppence laid the photograph on the desk beside the telegram. The red cross over the Colonel's face caught the light like a wound. "It's not just a threat," she said. "It's a message to anyone else who knows. Speak, and you share his fate." Tommy sat beside her. "Which means Mrs. Darcy is probably running, or worse." He poured them each a measure of brandy. "To our vanished Colonel and his unlucky nurse." Tuppence raised her glass, eyes still on the photograph. "And to the man with the limp, may he trip over his conscience." That night, neither slept well. Tuppence dreamed of railway platforms and faces vanishing into smoke. When she woke, the city outside was still dark, the silence broken only by the faint hum of early traffic. Tommy was already awake, sitting in the chair by the window. "Couldn't rest," he said. "I kept thinking, why the station? Why not a quiet cafe or a letter?" "Because she was afraid," said Tuppence. "Crowds make good shields." He nodded. "And yet, she still found us." Tuppence crossed to the desk, studying the telegram once more. It was hand-delivered. No postmark, no sender. Whoever sent it knew exactly where we were staying. "Meaning our friend with the limp," Tommy said, "or someone close to him." She traced a finger over the red cross on the photograph. "It's too deliberate, too calculated. If she's still alive, he's following her. If not," she stopped, "then we've inherited her secret." Tommy looked at her over the rim of his glass. "Which means it's time we stopped reacting and started hunting." Tuppence's expression softened into a faint smile. "That's the spirit, darling. Nothing like mortal peril to sharpen the wits." By morning, London had shrugged off the night. Trams clattered, papers rustled, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the corner bakery. To an outsider, the Beresfords looked like any well-dressed couple strolling arm in arm through Kensington. Only their eyes betrayed the alertness of people being watched and watching back. They paused at a news vendor's stand. The headline caught Tuppence's eye. "Body found in river. Police suspect suicide." Beneath it, in smaller print, "Woman identified as Mrs. Lydia Darcy, widow, age 42. The world seemed to narrow around them. Tuppence's voice was very quiet. "She's dead." Tommy took the paper, scanning the details. "Found near Hammersmith Bridge. Drowned. No foul play suspected." "No foul play," Tuppence repeated bitterly. "When there's nothing but foul play." Tommy folded the newspaper and slipped it into his pocket. "We can't help her now, but we can find who made that red cross on the Colonel's face and who decided she should vanish." Tuppence nodded once, her jaw set. "Then let's start with what she left behind." She looked back toward the bustle of the station behind them, the steam, the noise, the shadows. Somewhere among all that ordinary chaos, their invisible enemy was already moving the next piece into place. That night, back in their hotel room, Tuppence pinned the photograph to the wall beside the fragment of the Ironbridge map. Two pieces of the same riddle, one marked in red, the other in secrecy. She stepped back. "A colonel, a nurse, and a list of traitors," she said softly, "and one man with a limp to tie them all together." Tommy joined her at the window. The city stretched below, a restless sea of light and motion. "If we're right," he said, "we're up against something organized, not one man, but a machine." "Then we'll just have to jam the gears," said Tuppence. Tommy smiled faintly. "You make espionage sound like housework." "Both require timing and persistence," she replied, "and the occasional broom handle." He raised his glass. "To Mrs. Darcy. May she rest in peace and haunt her murderer." Tuppence looked out into the night. "Oh, she will," she murmured, "because I intend to see that she does." The Harbour Club looked different when one entered it under suspicion. Tommy said so as he held the door open for Tuppence, his voice low and dry. "I can't decide," he murmured, "whether this place smells of loyalty or treachery." "Whichever it is," said Tuppence, handing him her gloves, "it could do with more ventilation." The hall porter recognized them and hesitated, that fraction of a second too long that betrays gossip in progress. "Good afternoon, Major Thurston," he said, using Tommy's alias from their earlier visit. "You'll find the reading room quite empty at this hour." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Splendid. We detest company." Inside, the club was a museum of the Empire's pride. Dark panelling, rows of medals framed under glass, the smell of old tobacco and older stories. A grandfather clock ticked with military precision. Somewhere a chair creaked as if in salute. Tuppence paused by the portrait-lined corridor. "There he is," she whispered. "General Hargreaves, third frame on the left." Tommy followed her gaze. The portrait showed a hard-faced man in dress uniform, gaze fixed somewhere beyond judgment. Beneath, a brass plate gleamed. General R.E. Hargreaves, CBE, 1914 to 1919. Tuppence leaned closer. "That plate's new. Look, the Polish hasn't dulled yet." Tommy frowned. "You think someone changed it?" "I think someone hid something." Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame. "See this? A fine line of dust everywhere except under the lower corner." "You're suggesting our general's got secrets behind his medals?" "I'm suggesting," Tuppence said, "that men like Hargreaves never really retire. They just move their battlefields indoors." Tommy checked the corridor. Empty. He reached up, lifted the corner of the frame and tilted it forward. A thin envelope slid free, landing softly against the carpet. "Well," he murmured, "the general's correspondence, I presume." They carried it into the reading room, where Tuppence laid it flat on the table. The flap had no seal, only a faint watermark, Ministry of Defence. Inside were 3 sheets, one blueprint, one cipher page filled with letter groups, and one half-torn memo stamped Operation Ironbridge, classified. Tuppence exhaled slowly. "Blueprints of what?" Tommy unfolded the diagram. "Looks like a bridge, or a dam. Engineering design mixed with tactical markings. These notations here, supply routes, radio frequency codes." He stopped. "Tuppence, this isn't architecture. It's logistics. This whole thing's about transport. Troop movement, maybe. Ironbridge could have been a wartime plan for a communications network." "Or a smuggling route," she said softly. "What better cover than a military operation no one's allowed to discuss?" Before Tommy could answer, the door behind them slammed open. Major Latham stood in the doorway, face flushed, fists tight. "What the devil are you two doing?" Tuppence straightened gracefully. "Admiring military art, Major." He strode forward, eyes fixed on the papers. "You've no right to be here. That material's confidential." Tommy met his glare evenly. "Odd that you know what it is. We haven't shown it to you." Latham froze for half a second, long enough to betray knowledge he couldn't have gained innocently. Then his voice hardened. "You're trespassing, both of you. Hand those over." Tuppence smiled thinly. "If they're as innocent as you say, I see no harm in sharing them." Latham's jaw clenched. "You don't understand what you're meddling in." Tommy rose slowly, his manner deceptively casual. "Oh, we understand perfectly. You, Major, seem to have taken quite an interest in Ironbridge, more than an old regimental acquaintance should." Latham's eyes darted toward the door, calculating. "This conversation ends now." "And yet, it's only just begun," said Tuppence. "Tell me, was Colonel Arbuthnot a threat to you, or merely inconvenient?" That hit home. His face went crimson. "You dare!" He lunged toward the papers, but Tommy was faster. He stepped sideways, blocking the grab with easy precision learned years ago from less refined opponents. "Easy there. This club doesn't permit dueling." Latham's voice cracked. "You think you can play hero, Beresford? You've no idea who you're dealing with." "On the contrary," said Tommy quietly, "we're learning fast." The commotion drew attention. 2 club stewards appeared, followed by a constable summoned from the street. Latham, sensing the change of power, instantly altered his tone, from fury to injured dignity. "Officer," he barked, "these people broke into private property and interfered with confidential documents. I demand they be arrested." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "My dear Major, your performance would be more convincing if you weren't perspiring so profusely." The constable hesitated. Tommy produced a card from his wallet, not from the bureau this time, but the discreet government liaison who occasionally found the Beresfords useful. The name carried weight. "Special inquiry," Tommy said evenly. "Our presence here is sanctioned. You might want to check your sources before you start shouting treason." The constable read, frowned, and turned to Latham. "Sir, perhaps we should sort this out privately." Latham's outrage flickered, then deflated. Yes, of course. But the damage was done. Tuppence gathered the papers swiftly into the envelope and tucked it under her arm. As they left, Latham's voice followed them down the hall, quieter now, but edged with menace. "You're meddling in matters beyond your comprehension." Tuppence looked over her shoulder. "We usually are. It's what makes us interesting." Outside, the late afternoon light gave the street a golden haze, the kind that made London look almost innocent. Tommy hailed a taxi, but neither spoke until they were safely inside. He let out a long breath. "Well, that went swimmingly." Tuppence smiled faintly. "We have the papers, and confirmation that Latham's our man." Tommy tapped the envelope. "Yes, but he's dangerous. Cornered men always are." She glanced out the window as the city blurred past. "He knows we suspect him. That means we've only a short window before he acts." Tommy leaned back. "You think he orchestrated the Colonel's disappearance?" Tuppence nodded slowly. "He had motive, opportunity, and access to everything military. The Colonel must have discovered what Ironbridge truly was, and refused to stay silent." "But what is it now?" Tommy mused. "A smuggling ring? A spy network?" "Something worth killing for," she said, "and worth hiding behind a general's portrait." Back at the hotel, the Beresfords spread their new treasure across the table. The blueprints, when unfolded fully, formed a partial map of the southern coast, ports, depots, supply lines, and across one margin, faint pencil handwriting, "Hargreaves, confirm Bridgehead." Tuppence traced the letters with her finger. Bridgehead, Ironbridge. It's code, not geography. They were planning movement, agents perhaps, or information. Tommy frowned. The Colonel must have kept his own copy, the one Pierce helped him hide. That's what our limping friend stole from the storage room. "And Latham," said Tuppence, "was the hand behind it." She moved to the window, looking down at the street below. "He's too visible, too senior to get his own hands dirty. He orders others to act. The Colonel, Mrs. Darcy, both tried to expose something they shouldn't have known." Tommy poured 2 whiskies and handed her one. "The question is why he's still nervous if he's already silenced them." "Because he hasn't found what he's looking for," she said. "That list, the one Mrs. Darcy mentioned, the Colonel had names, Tommy. Latham's name might be among them." The telephone rang suddenly, sharp and shrill. Tommy answered. A clipped voice spoke at once. "You were warned to stop. You didn't. Now the bridge will collapse, and you with it." The line went dead. Tuppence set down her glass. "A friend with the limp, I presume?" Tommy replaced the receiver slowly. "I think our Major has just declared war." Later, when Tuppence finally allowed herself to sit, exhaustion crept in, yet her mind remained sharp, restless. "You realize," she said quietly, "we're now in possession of classified material, accused of espionage by a man who probably is a spy, and followed by someone who collects corpses for hobbies." Tommy smiled thinly. "Same as old times." "Except," she said, "I'm wearing better shoes." He reached across, covering her hand with his. "We'll end this, Tuppence, one way or another." Her gaze returned to the blueprints. The lines and markings seemed to shift in the lamplight. Bridges, rivers, names blurred by time. Somewhere within them lay the truth about Colonel Arbuthnot, and the shadow of the thing called Ironbridge. Tommy extinguished the lamp. Sleep while you can, he said quietly. Tomorrow we pay another visit to our general. Tuppence's lips curved, and perhaps we'll ask him what he keeps behind his medals. Outside, London moved on, trams clanging, voices fading, unaware that somewhere between the ghosts of war and the quiet corridors of its gentlemen's clubs, a long-buried conspiracy had begun to breathe again, and in that breath the name Ironbridge whispered like a promise of reckoning. The telephone rang just after midnight, one of those small, crisp sounds that slice cleanly through the hush of late hours. Tuppence was halfway through brushing her hair when Tommy lifted the receiver, his expression shifting from mild irritation to sudden alertness. Beresford speaking. There was static, then a frail voice, male, strained and edged with panic. "Tell them I'm alive." A rasping breath followed. "But not safe." "Who is this?" Tommy said sharply. "Colonel Arbuthnot." A soft click, and silence. Tuppence was already standing behind him. It was him, wasn't it? Tommy nodded slowly. The voice, faint but yes, and if he's alive, then someone's been lying all along. By dawn, Inspector Grant was seated in their hotel sitting room, his hat resting neatly on his knee. He was a quiet man with a precise manner, the sort who disliked mysteries unless they came with measurable evidence. "A trace won't be easy," he said, "but not impossible. That call was local, within London exchanges. Give me a few hours." Tuppence handed him the notepaper where Tommy had scrawled the fragments of the call. "He said he's alive, but not safe. That means someone's still after him." Grant nodded grimly. "Then let's hope we find him before they do." It was nearly 3 in the afternoon when the inspector returned, his expression tight. "Got it," he said. "Public line, outskirts of Richmond, near the river. Belongs to a ferry wharf that hasn't been much used since the war. There's a caretaker, a Mr. Biddle. Says no one rents the boathouse anymore." Tuppence rose at once. "Then we'd better rent it ourselves." Grant hesitated. "You're not to go in alone. I'll send 2 men. Tommy shook his head. "We'll take your men, Inspector, but they stay out of sight. The Colonel won't talk if he sees uniforms." Grant studied him a moment, then sighed. "You Beresfords are going to be the death of my paperwork. Fine, but I'll follow in a car, 100 yards back." The road to Richmond wound through the softer edges of London, hedges instead of shop fronts, the air smelling faintly of damp leaves and old wood smoke. By the time they reached the riverside, dusk had settled in, brushing the water with bronze. The boathouse stood at the end of a narrow track, half hidden by willows. Its windows were shuttered, its door padlocked, yet a faint wisp of smoke curled from the chimney. Tuppence glanced at Tommy. "Someone's home." They stepped quietly to the door. Tommy knocked once, twice, a pause, then a shuffle of feet within. The door opened a few inches, revealing an old man with a lantern. His face was weathered as driftwood. "Mr. Biddle?" Tommy asked softly. "That's me. We're looking for Colonel Arbuthnot." For a long moment the ferryman said nothing. Then his eyes softened. "Aye, he's here, but he's not well." Inside, the boathouse smelled of river damp and kerosene. A small fire burned in a rusted stove, throwing unsteady light over the planks. On a cot in the corner lay a man, gaunt and grey, his hair matted, his uniform jacket folded neatly on a chair beside him. Colonel Gerald Arbuthnot opened his eyes as they entered. Recognition flickered. Surprise, then weary relief. "Mrs. Beresford," he whispered. "You found me." Tuppence knelt beside him, taking his cold hand. "We've been looking for you for days. You shouldn't have stayed hidden." He smiled faintly. "No choice. They thought they'd killed me. Better they go on thinking so." Tommy crouched on the other side of the bed. "Who attacked you, Colonel?" "Latham," he breathed. "And his men. I trusted him once where we served together. Ironbridge was ours, you see, our secret. After the war, the project went dark. Most thought it dismantled. But Latham, he saw opportunity. He began selling fragments, engineering designs, code keys, to anyone with foreign gold." Tuppence's grip tightened. "And you tried to stop him?" "I gathered proof," the Colonel said weakly. "Documents, names, men who'd joined him. I gave copies to my contact, Miss Spencer. She worked with intelligence quietly, under another name. She was to hold them until I could go public." Tommy frowned. "But she vanished." She discovered they were watching her. She went to ground. Last I heard, she meant to destroy the originals if she couldn't deliver them safely. Tuppence leaned closer. And the list? The one Mrs. Darcy mentioned? The Colonel reached beneath the blanket, drawing out a small oilskin packet. His hands trembled as he pressed it into Tuppence's palms. "Coded names," he said. "Use the cipher from the blueprint margin. It's all there, every traitor, every transaction. But be careful. Once they know you have it, you'll never sleep safe again." His eyes fluttered shut, breath shallow. For a moment they feared he'd gone, but then he spoke again, barely audible. "Tell them, Ironbridge isn't just a plan. It's still running. Underground, beneath the river. A hidden network, moving secrets through London like smuggled wine." His words dissolved into coughing. Tommy eased him back gently. "Rest, Colonel. You're safe now." Biddle shuffled forward, worry creasing his weathered face. "He's been fading all day. I found him 2 nights ago, half dead near the lock. Said not to tell no one. I gave him shelter." "You did right," Tuppence said softly. Inspector Grant entered then, his boots muffled on the wood. One look at the cot, and his composure faltered. "Good Lord, he's alive." Tommy nodded. "Barely. Get him to a hospital under guard, discreetly. No publicity, no press." Grant gestured to his men. "Carefully, lads. Let's not jostle him." As they lifted the Colonel onto a stretcher, a folded scrap of paper slipped from his grasp. Tuppence caught it before it fell into the ashes. On it, written in shaking pencil, was a single line: "Ironbridge flows through men, not water." She stared at it, feeling the chill creep up her spine. "It's a warning," Tommy's eyes narrowed, "or a map, of influence, not geography." Back in the car, the night stretched long and uneasy. Streetlights flashed across Tuppence's face as she studied the oilskin packet in her lap. "Do you think he'll live?" she asked. "Grant's men will see to it," Tommy said quietly. "But whether he lives long enough to decode this, that's another matter." She opened the flap just enough to glimpse the first page. Columns of letters and numbers, neat as military orders. Beneath them, a faint watermark, the same Ministry of Defence seal they'd seen before. Tuppence closed it quickly. "It's the list," she murmured, "and if we're right, Latham's name will be on it." "Along with anyone else who's been keeping this machine turning," Tommy said. "The question is, how many still have power to silence us?" "Too many," she said, "but not enough, if we move fast." They reached London near midnight. The streets were emptying, the lamps haloed with mist. As they climbed the steps to their hotel, a shadow moved across the opposite pavement. Quick, deliberate, gone again. Tommy didn't look up. "We're being followed." "I know," said Tuppence. "He's limping." They said nothing more until they reached their room. Tommy locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. Tuppence laid the packet on the desk, her fingers brushing the surface like one might touch a bomb. "If this list is real," she said, "it could destroy half of Whitehall." Tommy sat down heavily. "And get us destroyed first." There was a knock at the door. 2 short taps, then silence. Tuppence's hand went automatically to her handbag, where she kept the small revolver she refused to travel without. Tommy went to the door. "Who is it?" A voice answered. "Grant's. Open up." Tommy did. The inspector stepped inside, rain on his coat. "The Colonel's alive. Barely. Doctors say exhaustion, exposure, malnutrition, but he'll pull through. For now." Relief flickered briefly across Tuppence's face. "Good, because we'll need his confirmation before Latham cries forgery." Grant's expression darkened. "Latham won't get the chance. He's disappeared. Walked out of the club an hour ago and never came back." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Then the bridge is moving again." They sat long after Grant had left, the oilskin packet lying between them like a sleeping serpent. The hotel clock ticked toward 1. Tuppence finally broke the silence. "It's strange, isn't it? How the war ends, but the battles don't." Tommy smiled wearily. "In our line of work, it's never peace. Only intermission." She opened the window slightly, letting in the muted hum of the city. Somewhere far off, a ship's horn sounded downriver, low, melancholy, eternal. "Do you think Miss Spencer's still alive?" she asked quietly. "If she is," Tommy said, "she'll come to us. The Colonel trusted her, and we've got what they all want." Tuppence glanced toward the desk where the packet lay. A list of ghosts. And one very live enemy, said Tommy. He stood, crossing to the mirror, watching his reflection with that half-wry, half-serious expression he wore before danger. Tomorrow, he said, we start decoding. Tuppence rose too. And if they come for it before then? He met her eyes. Then, darling, we'll make them wish they hadn't. Outside, the river whispered under the bridges, carrying secrets through London's sleeping veins. Somewhere near Richmond, a ferryman watched the slow drift of the current, murmuring a prayer for a soldier who'd lived too long with ghosts. And in a shuttered club on Pall Mall, an empty chair sat beneath the portrait of a general, its brass plate gleaming faintly, as if reflecting not the lamplight, but the weight of history stirring once again. The invitation went out under Tommy's steady hand, written on cream Harbour Club stationery, with the kind of calm flourish that hides its intent. Dear Major Latham, it has come to my attention that certain documents relating to the late Colonel Arbuthnot's affairs have surfaced. I propose a quiet meeting among gentlemen to prevent embarrassment to all concerned. Tonight, 8, at the club. Yours, Thomas Beresford. Tuppence read it over his shoulder. It's a masterpiece of understatement, she said. You make blackmail sound like bridge night. That's the goal, Tommy replied. Men like Latham don't attend confrontations. They attend opportunities. And Pierce? I sent him the same invitation, said Tommy. He deserves the chance to save his soul, if there's any left to salvage. Tuppence's eyes glinted. Let's hope he brings a conscience and not a gun. The Harbour Club that evening had the stillness of a stage before curtain. Lamps glowed amber through their shades. Portraits of dead officers looked down with solemn approval, and the faint scent of tobacco hung in the air. Tommy waited near the fireplace, every gesture relaxed, every nerve alert. He looked, as he always did in moments of danger, like a man waiting for his train rather than his enemy. At 7:50, Captain Pierce arrived, pale, anxious, his hands twitching as though seeking refuge in a cigarette. Beresford, he murmured. I shouldn't have come. Tommy smiled faintly. And yet you did. Pierce swallowed. Is it true? You found the papers? I found something, said Tommy, gesturing to a small case on the table beside him. Enough to end this, or to start something worse. Depends on who's in the room. Pierce looked toward the door. He'll come. Latham never resists control. Latham entered at precisely 8. His uniform was immaculate, his expression politely dismissive. A man who believed the world still deferred to him out of habit. Beresford, he said coolly, I can't imagine what's so urgent as to justify dragging me here under false pretences. Tommy gestured to the chairs. No pretense, Major. Merely an attempt to finish a conversation you interrupted about Ironbridge. The word landed like a small explosion. Latham's nostrils flared. You seemed determined to meddle in matters far beyond your understanding. And yet, said Tommy, I appear to understand them rather well. The Colonel is alive. That did it. Latham's composure cracked, just a flicker, but unmistakable. Impossible. He's under police protection, Tommy continued, and he talked. Pierce made a strangled sound. Good God! Tuppence stepped out from the adjoining lounge, perfectly calm, a folded document in her hand. He told us everything, Major, about the sales, the code names, the network. You, Captain Pierce, even the foreign attaché in Geneva. Latham's jaw tightened. This is absurd. You're waving rumours about like schoolchildren. Tommy opened the small case. Inside lay the decoy papers, blank sheets marked with false cipher. Then perhaps you'll explain why these interest you so much. Latham leaned forward despite himself. Where did you get those? From the Colonel's effects, Tommy said. I thought it best to return them to the proper custodian. Latham's eyes darkened. Hand them over. Tommy's tone remained mild. So they are important. Latham realized his mistake too late. I meant confidential. Pierce suddenly pushed back his chair. For God's sake, Latham, stop. You've done enough. Quiet, fool, Latham snapped. You're in this as deep as I am. I was forced into it, Pierce shouted, rising to his feet. You threatened to ruin me. Said you'd expose my debts. I never wanted... Latham moved faster than anyone expected. His hand darted inside his coat and came out gripping a revolver. Sit down, he barked. All of you. Tuppence didn't flinch. You're only proving him right, Major. Be silent. His voice shook now, the authority cracking. You don't understand. They'll hang me if this gets out. You think I did this for profit? For myself? It was bigger than that. Orders came from higher up, men you'd never dare accuse. Tommy's tone was quiet but cutting. Names, Latham. You've gone this far. Finish it. Never. He gestured toward the case. Slide it here. Tuppence met Tommy's eyes. He nodded once, the smallest of signals. Then, very deliberately, she shifted her handbag, tipping it from the table. It struck the floor with a sharp crack, a prearranged signal of their own. Down the corridor, a door burst open. Inspector Grant stepped in, followed by 2 plainclothes men. Major Latham, Grant said coolly, drop the weapon. For a moment the major looked like a cornered animal, the instinct to fight warring with the certainty of defeat. Then he fired. The first shot shattered the mirror behind Tommy. The second grazed the mantel. Smoke filled the room, acrid and sudden. Tommy dove sideways, knocking the case off the table. Latham tried to reach it, but Grant's men were faster, one tackling him low, the other striking his wrist. The revolver clattered to the carpet and spun to a stop beside Tuppence's shoe. When the noise subsided, Latham was on his knees, breathing hard, his collar askew, the last pretense of dignity gone. Grant hauled him up. You're finished, Major. Latham stared wildly at Tommy. You think you've won. You haven't. Ironbridge doesn't end with me. There are others, men above you, behind you. They'll keep the bridge standing. Tommy met his gaze evenly. Then we'll bring it down, brick by brick. In the quiet that followed, the ticking of the clock sounded impossibly loud. Pierce sat trembling, his head in his hands. Tuppence crossed to him. You can still set things right, she said gently. Tell the inspector everything, every name, every meeting. He looked up, eyes red. You don't understand. I was in debt. Latham offered money, said it was only correspondence, nothing serious. Then when I wanted out, he made threats. I was trapped. Then untrap yourself, said Tommy. Help us close the bridge. Pierce nodded slowly, defeated. All right. There's a ledger, hidden in Latham's flat. Names, payments, dates. I'll take you there. Grant motioned to his men. Do so, carefully. And Beresford, his voice softened. Good work. Tommy smiled faintly. I'm getting too old for this kind of recreation. Tuppence slipped her arm through his. You say that every time, darling, then you start again. An hour later, in the club's deserted lounge, the Beresfords sat together beneath the gaze of General Hargreaves's portrait. Outside, the siren of a departing police car echoed through the night. Tuppence broke the silence first. It's odd. You spend weeks chasing ghosts, and when you finally catch one, he bleeds like anyone else. Tommy poured them both brandy. Justice is rarely tidy, but the Colonel can rest now, knowing the truth is out. Part of it, she corrected. He said Ironbridge flows through men, not water. There will be others. Tommy raised his glass. Then we'll keep our eyes open for leaky bridges. She smiled faintly. You're incorrigible. That's why you married me. They clinked glasses, the sound delicate as crystal against the heavy quiet of the room. By the next morning, the newspapers were full of club shooting scandal, retired officer arrested on treason charges. The articles naturally omitted the Beresfords' names. That was how Tommy preferred it. Inspector Grant met them at the yard that afternoon. Pierce is cooperating, he said. Latham's network went deeper than expected. Ex-intelligence men, foreign liaisons, even a shipping firm in Antwerp. We'll be busy for months. And the Colonel? Tuppence asked. Recovering, said Grant. He's asking for you both. Tommy nodded. We'll visit him tomorrow. He deserves to see the bridge collapse. That evening, as the sun set over the Thames, Tommy and Tuppence walked along the embankment where Mrs. Darcy had met her fate. The water glimmered under the fading light, quiet, watchful, as though keeping its own counsel. Tuppence leaned on the railing. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, if the world's too full of secrets? Tommy smiled. No, just full of people who think they can keep them. She turned to look at him. And us? We only borrow them for a while, he said. Then we hand them back, neatly labelled and slightly improved. She laughed, a soft, tired sound. You make espionage sound like housekeeping again. It's much the same, said Tommy. A little dusting, a bit of polishing, and occasionally one throws out the rubbish. At their hotel, A letter waited, forwarded from Richmond Hospital. The handwriting was weak but unmistakable. Dear Beresfords, thank you. The bridge is gone, but its shadow remains. Look to the names you cannot read. They are the ones who matter most. G. Arbuthnot. Tuppence folded the note, slipping it into her diary. The Colonel still talking in riddles. Tommy smiled. That's the mark of a true soldier. Never give the enemy an easy victory, even after the war's over. He crossed to the window. Outside, the city shimmered, alive and unrepentant. The bridges arched over the river like veins of light, each carrying its share of traffic, secrets, and second chances. Tuppence joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. So, what now? Tommy considered. A week in Devon. No spies, no colonels, no coded messages. She arched an eyebrow. You're forgetting we attract trouble like cream attracts cats. He chuckled. Then we'll just have to bring a bigger saucer. Down below, the river flowed on, steady, relentless, washing away the footprints of men who thought themselves indestructible. And somewhere in the half-lit current, the last remnants of Ironbridge sank quietly out of sight, leaving only ripples, and two silhouettes on the balcony above, sharing the peace they'd fought to restore. Peace, like a guest who'd stayed away too long, returned to Sutton Mead in its own deliberate fashion. The war of whispers, telegrams, and coded threats had faded into the background hum of English normality. Kettles whistling, clocks ticking, gossip blooming like perennial weeds. For Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, it felt oddly unnatural. After weeks of chase and peril, the quiet seemed to creak under its own weight. Tuppence said as much one mild morning as she poured tea on the terrace. It's unnatural, she declared. All this serenity. I can't even remember the last time someone tried to poison our breakfast. Tommy looked up from his newspaper. Be thankful, old girl. I'd rather enjoy a scandal vicariously for once. He tapped a headline. Treason trial adjourned. Major pleads guilty. Latham's out of the picture. The Colonel's safe. London's pretending it's never heard of Ironbridge. Pretending, said Tuppence, is England's national sport. The Morning Post arrived with its usual clatter of hooves on gravel. Albert, loyal as ever, appeared with a tray of envelopes, and one small parcel wrapped in brown paper. No sender, he said cheerfully, though it smells military if you ask me. Tuppence slit the wrapping. Inside lay a slim cedar box, its lid stamped with a regimental crest. She opened it to reveal a neat row of cigars and a folded note, written in a firm but shaky hand. Tommy took it and read aloud, Ironbridge held G. Arbuthnot. He smiled faintly. Brief, gallant, and impossible to misunderstand. Tuppence sighed. Typical Colonel, the man could condense an entire conspiracy into 2 words and a full stop. Tommy picked up one of the cigars, sniffed it appreciatively, and set it down. Well, that settles it. You've officially earned your stripes, Mrs. Beresford. Perhaps I should petition the War Office to award you a pension. She arched an eyebrow. A pension? My dear, I've only just begun earning my mischief allowance. You forget, espionage is rather addictive. Then we'd better keep a map handy, Tommy said. You never know which corner of England will next require our unique blend of improvisation and disaster. Later that afternoon, they strolled through Sutton Mead, where the hedgerows leaned lazily into the lane, and the church clock chimed with its usual smug punctuality. Peace looked very well on the village. The grocer's boy whistled as he pedalled past, the blacksmith's hammer rang faintly across the green, and the world, in general, seemed content to forget how close it had come to shadows. Mrs. Pym, however, had not forgotten a thing. She descended upon them near the duck pond, her hat trembling under the weight of self-importance. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, you'll never guess what I've heard. Tuppence exchanged a knowing glance with Tommy. We've learned never to underestimate your sources, Mrs. Pym. Do enlighten us. Mrs. Pym leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that could have been heard from the next parish. They say someone saw a woman in grey near the old cottage again, the one by the orchard. Just last night, mind you, walking at dusk as bold as you please. Tuppence smiled. And did she vanish as mysteriously as before? Indeed she did. Though between us, Mrs. Pym added darkly, I always said there was something peculiar about that place. First the Colonel, then the lady, now this. Well, I suppose the dead never rest easily. Tommy coughed politely. Let's hope the living do, at least. Mrs. Pym sniffed. Quite. Still, I do wish the authorities would look into it. Tuppence's eyes twinkled. My dear Mrs. Pym, I rather think they have, and found it best to let the matter sleep. As Mrs. Pym bustled away, Tuppence slipped her arm through Tommy's. You know, she said softly, I almost hope there was a woman in grey. Tommy grinned. Sentimental nonsense. Perhaps, but I like to imagine it was Miss Spencer. Alive, clever, and keeping watch. Some secrets deserve to be left unburied. Spoken like a true conspirator. Like a true romantic, she corrected, smiling. There's a difference. Tommy considered. Not much of one in your case. They crossed the green where the afternoon sun spread over the grass like honey. The village cricket team was setting up for practice, whites gleaming, voices carrying easily across the field. Tuppence paused to watch. There's something wonderfully reassuring about a bat meeting a ball after one's dealt with revolvers and ciphers. Normalcy, said Tommy, a most underrated luxury. Until the next adventure calls, she replied. He looked at her sidelong. You sound almost eager. I am, she said simply. Peace is lovely, but a bit of danger keeps one young. Then heaven help me, said Tommy, for you're destined for immortality. That evening, as dusk melted into velvet, they sat in the garden, a single lamp casting a soft circle of light over the table. Tommy struck a match, lit one of the Colonel's cigars, and let the smoke curl lazily into the air. To the Colonel, he said, a man who refused to sink and took his secrets swimming. Tuppence raised her teacup in reply. To the bridge that finally collapsed. They drank, one in smoke, the other in china. Silence settled between them, companionable and complete. Somewhere an owl called from the copse, somewhere else a bicycle bell chimed faintly in the lane. Do you ever think, Tuppence said after a while, how peculiar our lives have been? Most couples get married, have arguments about curtains. We, on the other hand, get telegrams in code and corpses in cupboards. Tommy smiled through the cigar haze. Yes, but our curtains are still impeccable. She laughed softly, then rose, looking out across the meadow where the lights of the village twinkled like faraway ships. Promise me something, Tommy. Anything short of a second war. When the next call comes, and it will, promise you won't tell me to stay behind. He stood beside her. You wouldn't listen if I did. She nodded, pleased. Precisely. A breeze rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting second, Tuppence thought she saw a shape move along the distant hedgerow, a slim figure in grey, fading with the twilight. She said nothing, only smiled. Tommy followed her gaze. What is it? Nothing, she said quietly. Just a ghost saying goodbye. He took her hand, squeezing it gently, then let her vanish again. Gladly, said Tuppence. Some secrets are better left resting. The church clock struck 8. Across the lane, the village lights flickered to life one by one. The Beresfords turned toward home, their silhouettes merging as they walked. The detective couple of England, heroes of quiet wars, bound not by medals but by mischief, memory, and the certainty that somewhere, some trouble, however improbable, would soon enough come knocking again. And when it did, they would answer, together as always.